The Japanese are titans in the gaming world, and their journey to prominence is nothing short of extraordinary. It began with their exposure to a metaphorical forbidden fruit, a Portuguese dragon deck, and escalated to an all-out war on cards, culminating in the mafia killing debtors over tiny images of chrysanthemums and wisterias. This is a Playing Games deep dive, so steer up your yakitori, print out your ticket at a Lost and Family Mart, refuse services to all non-Japanese races, and katsu. During this video, I may mention some games that I've made videos for. If I can, I will link out to each in the video, but look in the description for more. Despite Japan's proximity to Korea and China, both of which had paper playing cards as early as the 10th century, Japan didn't get its own cards until about 600 years later. Cause, you know, China, Japan... This delay was finally rectified around the 1580s when Portuguese traders and missionaries introduced cards to Japan. The Portuguese taught the Japanese their cartas. The initial Japanese decks were modeled after these Portuguese ones, which by the way are no longer produced by the Portuguese. Japanese playing cards have a fascinating history, filled with twists and turns that mirror the nation's tumultuous journey through cultural exchange, isolation, and innovation. Today we're peeling back the layers of this Hakone black egg to explore how these cards evolved from forbidden contraband to cultural icons, and how a little bundle of paper can change the world in unexpected and wonderful ways. Hi, I'm Chris and welcome to Playing Games. Please comment, like, and subscribe. This is going to be as informative as a trip to Disney's Sea, and cost a lot less money. Today we're diving into the mysterious world of Japanese playing cards, tracing their origins from the greedy hands of European traders through their evolution to flower cards and influence on modern gaming culture. Chapter 1. The arrival of the Portuguese, or Japan opening Pandora's box of cards. Our story begins in 1543 when Portuguese traders set foot on Tanegashima Island, an island in Japan's Kyushu region. These adventurous Europeans brought with them a treasure trove of woes, firearms, Christianity, and best of all, playing cards. The Japanese referred to these cards as Karuta, borrowing from the Portuguese word carta. These weren't ordinary cards. The decks were based on Spanish and Portuguese styles, complete with suits like ouros, coins, espadas, swords, copas, cups, and paus, clubs. With only 40 to 48 cards in this abbreviated deck, these colorful cards carried the allure and mystery of foreign ideas, gambling, and perhaps more dangerously, Western religion. Chapter 2. Cards as cultural ambassadors, or the gateway to colonial masters. The arrival of the Portuguese was soon followed by Jesuit missionaries, including the famous Francis Xavier, who sought to spread Christianity across Japan. The cards served as unlikely ambassadors used by the Jesuits to engage with the local population and build rapport. Playing cards then as now can cut through the Gordian knot of cultural divides. They became an entry point to a nation both fascinated by and wary of foreign influence. While little documentation survives, we know these cards quickly became popular. So popular that only an act of God could have halted their rise. And that's exactly what happened. More on that in a bit. As mentioned, the Chinese had already been producing paper playing cards for half a century before the Japanese started. Nonetheless, both nations were exceptionally early producers of paper goods, and it wasn't long before the Japanese began producing their own playing cards. The first known Japanese-made cards, known as Tensho Karuta, were crafted in the late 16th century, directly inspired by the Portuguese decks brought by the European traders. These Japanese cards retain the same suits as their Iberian predecessors: coins, cups, swords, and clubs. However, they featured distinct stylistic adaptations to suit local tastes. Tensho Karuta cards were smaller than European decks, perhaps influenced by sailors who trimmed their decks for portability. You know, travel size. The card designs were more stylized with simpler and more abstract patterns compared to the intricate illustrations on the European cards. This simplicity made them easier and quicker to produce, a critical factor given their soon-to-be clandestine nature. The artwork of Tensho Karuta became a fusion of European and Japanese elements. The cards were often hand-painted with vibrant colors, utilizing red, black, and golden hues to create striking visuals. While the suits remained recognizable to those familiar with the Portuguese deck, the figures and court cards were reimagined with Japanese influences, sometimes depicting local attire and aesthetics. Additionally, these cards were made from thicker paper or cardstock, making them more durable and flexible than European cards. However, what started as literal fun and games quickly became entangled in the suspicion that these European visitors had colonization on their minds. As Christianity gained a foothold, so did the hostility toward it. The cards, with their connection to Western culture, became caught in a complex web of politics and religion. By the early 17th century, the Tokugawa shogunate began to crack down on Christianity, viewing it as a threat to social order and their authority, which is weird since there are no other incidences of Europeans using religion to subdue and colonize other cultures. Vergonia. Chapter 3, Christianity Under Siege, or Christianity under siege too. The persecution of Christians in Japan was both swift and brutal. The initial openness to foreign ideas quickly turned into fear and anger. Christians were seen as agents of foreign influence, potentially destabilizing the carefully controlled order of Japanese society. The crackdown reached its peak with the execution of 26 Christians in Nagasaki in the year 1597, an event meant to serve as a stark warning to potential converts. As a result, the authorities seized and burned Tensho Karuta out of existence. While it would be great to see what the Tensho Karuta cards looked like from the 1590s, there are no surviving copies of it. Thankfully, there is a way we can see what they would have looked like. The Kobe City Museum possesses a wooden box crafted from the original wood blocks used to print Tensho Karuta cards. So they were able to take the wood blocks and reprint them. Reprints of the original Tensho design can now be seen, and they are stunning. We can't see what the original cardstock looked like or the original printing ink, but we can see a pretty good facsimile of that. And for the sake of history, thank goodness we can. The Portuguese were known for printing dragons on their race cards. Why they stopped doing that? That's a great question, Portugal. Why aren't you doing that anymore? Put the damn dragons back on the damn aces. Here we see the Japanese interpretation of that detail. Let's compare this with the 1580s Portugal national deck. The next surviving style of cards wouldn't appear until 100 years later. The Japanese would make several different types of karutas, and here are a few of them. There was Unsung Karuta, a 75 card, 5-suited deck. Kabufuda, a 40 card deck. Komatsufuda, which was basically the Tensho Karuta deck, but with abstract shapes to try to get around the card ban. Obaki Karuta, which was all about collecting mythical monsters. And of course, Hanafuda. But for the next 300 years or so, Japan would not see a Western-style poker deck. Not until the House of Mario came along. More on that in a bit. Chapter 4, the Great Card Ban. Or, the economic vacuum of demand leaves openings for agents of the black market. The shogunate imposed strict bans on Western goods, including these foreign cards, because they were associated with gambling and moral corruption, as well as those duplicitous European Christians. The ban also provided a convenient excuse to purge foreign influence during a time of growing isolationism. But like any good gambler, the Japanese adapted in the shadows. And how did they do that? They created new versions of the cards that cleverly disguised their true purpose and Western origins. Side quest: Menko cards, or the notorious POG. Once the Portuguese cursed coffer had been opened, it couldn't be shut. The Japanese found novel ways to play with cards without actually playing cards. Menko cards, known as Menko, originated in Japan shortly after the Portuguese arrived, and grew in popularity during the Edo period from 1603 to 1868. These cards became a popular children's game. The name Menko refers to the cards themselves, which were initially thought to be made of clay or wood. Over time, they transitioned into cardboard and paper. During the next several centuries, these cards featured printed images of historical figures, sumo wrestlers, and of course later, Pokemon. Personally, I like to imagine the Japanese children inventing this game using discarded Portuguese cards. Without enough cards to play a full game, they likely competed and traded cards, trying to collect them all. However, it's not clear what the first Menko cards were, even though you now know my theory, but they were small flat objects used to flip or knock over an opponent's piece. While the rules of this game didn't really evolve, the design of the cards did, which became more elaborate and decorative. With advancements in printing technology during the Meiji period, Menko cards became more widespread, featuring a variety of designs including military leaders, cultural heroes, and of course, mythical monsters. After World War II, Menko experienced a resurgence in popularity with cards depicting anime characters, superheroes, and sports figures appealing to a new generation of children. Menko cards became a cultural staple in Japan, influencing later collectible cards. The concept of collectible cards seen in Menko laid the groundwork for later card games like Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh!, all of which have become internationally successful. Additionally, Menko cards were used as educational tools, helping children learn about historical figures and events through play. It was really just about throwing an object on the table as hard as you could, though. For those of us in the US, the Menko phenomenon might remind you of the POG craze from the 1990s.
Yo, it all started back in the islands when the sun stays shining.
POGs were invented in Hawaii in the 20th century, with a game involving the flipping of milk bottle caps to win loose caps from other players. The term POG comes from the popular brand of fruit juice made by the Halieka Dairy, which stood for passion fruit, orange, and guava. POG, P-O-G. Inspired by a school teacher who taught Menko to her students, the kids began collecting POGs, and soon the game spread to the continental US, where countless POG-like discs were produced. Though POGs eventually fell out of favor, the idea of collectible cards has endured and flourished beyond imagination. In the 1990s, collectible cards brought in around 100 million annually. Today, that number has skyrocketed to about 20 billion per year. Hopefully some of that cheese is going back to the Halieka Dairy.
Menko the POGs, it's all in the shrine, a piece of the past, still fresh in our mind.
There were other card variations that retained the appearance of these tactile wonders while carefully avoiding the perception of European-style gaming cards. These became Japanese flashcards, particularly in the context of games like Uta Karuta and Iroha Karuta. These games focused on matching poems, proverbs, and illustrations. These cards have influenced the creation of flashcards in educational systems worldwide. Now back to the main quest. Chapter 5. The Beauty of Hanafuda, or Tiptoe Through the Garden. Japanese adults thirsted for European-style playing cards, and no band could quench that thirst. In response to the card bans, Japanese artisans created Hanafuda, or flower cards. These decks were a masterstroke of ingenuity, featuring traditional motifs like flowers and animals, all wrapped in layers of cultural symbolism. These cards are a visual feast, vibrant, richly detailed, and each a work of art in its own right. Yet beneath their beautiful facades, these cards were symbols of resistance. Hanafuda allowed players to gamble like the Europeans, but under the radar. Evading the scrutiny of government officials, it became a game of cat and mouse where the cards themselves were players in a grander scheme. To circumnavigate the card bans, Japanese card makers developed a variety of new games that gradually distanced themselves from their European origins. Hanafuda cards are very small, typically measuring around 55 by 35 millimeters, making them convenient to hold and play, and maybe hide. Not at all like the larger Portuguese decks, each deck consisted of 48 cards divided into 12 suits. I mean, months. But unlike European cards, Hanafuda have no numbers. Instead, each suit represents a month of the year associated with a particular plant or flower, reflecting Japan's deep appreciation for nature and the changing of seasons, and not at all gambling. This design not only reflects Japanese aesthetics, but also makes it difficult for authorities to categorize these cards as gambling tools. So if a government official found these in your possession, you could easily claim to be a nature lover interested in a portable image of seasonal plants, and not at all into gambling. I think the Hanafuda cards are quite beautiful, and they're very firm to the touch. They don't bend very easily. As tiny as they are, they're very tough. They're stout but mighty. The most popular game played with Hanafuda is Koi Koi. Koi Koi is not just about luck, it requires strategy, memory, and a keen understanding of horticulture. Players must decide whether to continue the round, Koi Koi, or settle for the points they have, balancing risk versus reward. But these games can be challenging to learn. You have to differentiate between 12 sometimes hard to identify suits and understand how these cards form point earning sets. I've got you covered though. I've invented a new Japanese solitaire game called Shinkansen Solitaire. No joke. It's a fun way to use a Hanafuda deck for the first time or for the 100th. Best of all, its simple rules will help you get used to sorting out the 12 seasons and other confusing icons. Before you know it, you'll be able to distinguish between a Paulownia and a peony. And after playing Shinkansen Solitaire, you'll be better prepared to take on games like Koi Koi. Click on the link to learn my brand new game, Shinkansen Solitaire. In this game, you'll take on the role of a conductor on a bullet train known as the Shinkansen. Your job is to sort out ticket holders in their respective parties and kick out 8 scofflaws who are just trying to get a free ride. It's still in beta, so stay tuned for updates. Chapter 6, Cards in the Yakuza, or Bad Guys Like Pretty Flowers. Now here's where things get even more interesting. The origins of the Yakuza trace back to the 1610s, which is coincidentally around the same time that the Western playing cards were introduced to Japan. Coincidence? As Hanafuda gained popularity, they also caught the attention of the Yakuza, Japan's infamous criminal organization. Because, duh, the mob and gambling go hand in glove. The Yakuza adopted Hanafuda for their gambling dens, transforming them into symbols of both rebellion and general gaming badassery. The mask was off, and the Yakuza allowed the Japanese to stop pretending that their games were made for plant lovers. These cards became as Europeans intended, tools for competitive money exchanges, clever cheating, and blood feuds. The connection between Hanafuda and the Yakuza added an edge of danger and allure to the cards. They became tokens of a shadowy world where fortunes could be won or lost with the flick of a card. Despite repeated government bans, Hanafuda persisted, largely due to the public's love of the game and the covert operations of criminal groups. And despite the bans, the government was just gonna have to learn that the people want what the people want. There's another connection between the cards and the Yakuza, tattoos. In Japan, tattoos are associated with the mob and are strictly forbidden from being displayed publicly. In fact, if you visit a beach, you'll see signs like these. For centuries, Japanese tattoos were reserved for the Yakuza. Their purpose? To show rank, not unlike playing cards. In fact, it's rumored that many of the designs chosen by the Yakuza clans can be found on Hanafuda cards. Chapter 7, Nintendo's Gambit, or From Cards to Consoles. Koi Koi is a fine game, but it's no poker. And for the Yakuza to make serious money, they needed access to Western-style decks. By the end of the 19th century, that door finally opened. The Meiji Restoration allowed Japan to experience Western influence once again. The Meiji government, which began in 1868, adopted many Western customs and practices, leading to a renewed acceptance of Western-style playing cards. As you can imagine, there was high demand for a more versatile deck with many possible ways to play games. The demand was so high that companies pivoted from producing Hanafuda cards to poker-style cards. In 1902, one such company made that pivot, taking a major step to changing global gaming. Yes, we all knew we'd get to this. The company that would stereotype Italians and charm generations of players, young and old. Enter Mintendo.
Nintendo.
That's what I just said. Nintendo.
Nintendo Kopai was founded by Fusajiro Yamauchi in September of 1889. Nintendo's origins are steeped in a fascinating history intertwined with Japan's gambling culture and even the Yakuza. The company initially produced Hanafuda cards made from mulberry tree bark, which were favored by the Yakuza for their gambling activities. At that time, getting into the business of cards meant that many of your customers would be involved in illegal underground gambling. But that's no fault of Nintendo's. However, the company's name Nintendo meant leave luck to heaven, which sounds like something you might say if you were trying to win a competitive game. Another organization that was named after a gambling term was the Yakuza, whose name derived from a losing hand in the Japanese baccarat-like card game called Oichibo Kabu. By the 1920s, Nintendo worked to rehabilitate the image of Hanafuda, shifting from a symbol of vice to one of tradition and family entertainment, laying the groundwork for the company's future success. Initially, Nintendo only produced Hanafuda cards. However, their addition of Western-style cards brought them early success. After World War II, Nintendo saw broader opportunities in the global market and partnered with foreign distributors. In 1969, they teamed up with the only entertainment company more litigious about intellectual property than they are, Disney. Yes, the House of Mouse and the House of Mario got together and had this beautiful baby. Nintendo tried their hand at various businesses but always returned to gaming, and their playing card sales bankrolled their other ventures. With their first arcade accessory, they found success in something relatable to their Yakuza base, propelling them into video gaming and ultimately changing the destiny of global gaming. That said, there's something about the core design of Nintendo's Hanafuda cards that echoes in their main games. The design, principles, and storytelling found in Hanafuda seems to have influenced franchises like The Legend of Zelda, Paper Mario, and Pokemon. Yes, I know Pokemon is Game Freak, but really, is it? It's just Nintendo. If you go to Tokyo, to the Nintendo store, there's a Pokemon store inside of there. Pokemon is Nintendo. While Nintendo is perhaps the most famous example of a company that transitioned from card games to video games, other Japanese companies have also drawn on the heritage of playing cards in their game design. The influence of Japanese card games is evident in various gaming genres such as role-playing games, RPGs, collectible card games, CCGs, and strategy games, SGs. The principles of chance strategy and storytelling are embedded in these traditional games, and they're deeply ingrained in the DNA of most modern video games. They have transcended their original purpose, evolving into something much more, a bridge between the past and the present. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that there was no surviving copies of the first known Japanese playing cards. Now, I kind of lied, and I held this back to the very end. So if you've been grinding this video out, here's your cosmetic collectible. Despite the bans and passage of time, there is one Tensho Karuta card from the 16th century that still exists. Tucked away in this museum, a single 16th century card, the King of Clubs, survives, giving us a tantalizing glimpse into a world long gone. Yes, this card was made in the 1580s, 1590s. It's on the original paper with the original ink, and this is what it looks like. Let me put it this way. An alien civilization visits us for the first time, and they show us all kinds of things. Their ideas of government, their foods, their religion, their games. Well, the Japanese got all of that from the Portuguese, and what did they produce? Cards. The idea of play and competition is universal. It transcends governments, language, religion, and this King of Clubs embodies that. It stood the test of time to show us there was a connection between the Portuguese and the Japanese. They did something together. Despite their suspicions, they took the time to sit down and play a game together. And apparently it was a good moment because the Japanese didn't reject the cards, they accepted the cards. They enjoyed playing the games. That to me is what this card represents. Everything good about humanity is right there in that card. People who had very little in common found a way to bridge their differences, and that happened through gaming. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the history of Japanese playing cards. If you have other insights or stories to share, please leave a comment Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe, and support this channel for more in-depth exploration of gaming history and culture. You are great. See you next time on Playing Games.
So next time you play, just know where it's from. A game with history, ain't no hit and run. Menko the Portugues, it's all intertwined. A piece of the past, still fresh in our mind. And from the East Coast vibe to the island sway. Portugues and Menko, that's how we play.